Hi, welcome on, dear friends and supporters, to a Dunc'd On live edition of what? The 50 and
Mhm.
60 mailbag, I guess? Okay, well, that's good. I haven't actually started recording the podcast yet. So you don't, sorry, if you're listening on the live stream, you don't get particularly polished at the beginning, but we can do at least some reactions. Steve Kerr's, our reaction to Steve Kerr's reaction to the officiating last night. Oh, that was good. That was a good one, actually. Yeah.
Um, the NBA's reaction to the four teams that made it to Vegas.
All right, and the audience's reaction to our usual start of the podcast.
Woo.
Okay, let's get rolling here. All right, welcome on to Dunc'd On. For those of you listening on the free feed, I highly encourage you to sign up for our free mailing list. Dan Feldman sent out the first edition of that today. Twice per week, you will get his writing, his daily dunks, reacting to the latest news around the league. No reason not to sign up for that. If you presumably are interested in our content, Dan does a really good job of digging into stuff that we've talked about on the podcast even further with statistical analysis, analysis of the news, cap analysis. So it's some of the best writing, I think, on a daily basis that's out there. And you can get access to it for free twice a week with our mailing list. So let's get to work here. We had so many questions over the weekend that we decided we were just going to do four more teams at the end here. So we'll finish up our 15 and way more than 60. Let us begin, Danny, with the Orlando Magic.
Let's do it. After their quarterfinal loss, the Bucks, or sorry, the Bucks, the Magic are now 17-10 on the season, a strong 8-4 since the last 15-60. Eighth in clean the glass net rating, 23rd on offense, third on defense. And BPI has them finishing as the 3 seed, I believe, still in the Eastern Conference. And
Yep, 49 wins is the projection for Orlando. Though, again, I don't believe that BPI is aware that Franz and Paulo, at least for a couple of weeks here, are going to be out.
And I think that's a natural kind of transition into the question from Jepson, which is thinking a little bit past this of given the success of Goga Bitadze over the last few weeks, how do you think Orlando will manage their center rotation once Paulo returns and Wendell Carter goes back to his usual position?
Well, I think he wrote that before Franz Wagner went down with the torn oblique. So I think they'll continue and just move Paulo in as the starting 3 and
Yeah,
continue
that's
with
fair.
Carter at the 4. Obviously, they can't start Jonathan Isaac because he's hurt again with the hamstring, and he also just can't play that many minutes. But I think once Franz and Paulo return, yeah, they just move Carter back to the 5. They want to give Paulo and Franz as much space as possible to operate, which Goga, as good as he's been, doesn't do. And you can't really move Franz or Paulo to the 2, I wouldn't say. You're just not going to have enough shooting there. They signed KCP as well. He fits in really well, I think, in that backcourt with Suggs. So maybe it's a lineup they could play a little bit of with the 2 bigs, and also depending on whether Jonathan Isaac is available or not, and what they feel like they can get out of him. So I think they'll probably, Goga's been good enough that you wouldn't want him to be totally out of the rotation. And maybe you would even consider some moments where you play Goga and Jonathan Isaac together and really just have a ridiculous defensive front court. But also Mo Wagner is their third
Yeah.
best scorer. And so they got to get some time for him. So it certainly is one of those good problems, a clear indication that the league completely missed on Goga Bitadze. What did he end up getting? Like $7 million a year?
My brain was saying 3 for 15, but I'll check it to be sure.
Yeah, and like some non-guarantees on the end of it. Like Goga, he could like step in and be a starting center. Not a good one, but he's better than some guys, I would say, who actually are starting at center right now.
Goga Bitadze, I have it in my sheet as 3 years, 25 million. So
Yeah, so that was a pretty good contract for him. That's something that he's an expensive luxury for the Magic, but they could afford it. And yeah, there are no non-guarantees. It does, of course, in the best Magic fashion descend. So it gets down to 7.6 million, but still, he is well exceeded that level of production, and he did it last year. Quite frankly, I think the league to like to sign Jonas Valanciunas for more than Goga Bitadze, that I thought was really a problem. Goga, I thought it was interesting. We didn't talk about it on the show about the quarterfinal, but Goga actually took a couple of threes. Like they realized that they just need more offensive production. So I think they've greenlit that, particularly if he's playing with Carter as well. It didn't make any of them. He still can't hit one of those shots, but if he ever does get to that point, it could get pretty interesting.
It could. Question from Carl asking our opinion on Jalen Suggs. Can he be the third best player in a championship team? And I wanted to start with a quick update on Jalen Suggs' three-point shooting because last year was the big breakout, one of the largest season-to-season improvements that we've seen. Last year, 40% on 6.8 threes per 36. That 6.8 is now up to 8.6, but Jalen Suggs is only making 32%. And his shot diet is harder, especially right now. We saw that in the quarterfinal. But the thing that I think is going to be worth watching, not doing great on pull-up threes, taking more of them this year. I do not consider that a part of the best version of Jalen Suggs, except for opportunistically. But last year, Suggs shot 41% on catch and shoot threes. This year, he's down to 34.5%. And that, I mean, you can live with it because he's such a good defender. But getting to Carl's question about third best player in a championship team, he would have to be more like what he was last year or improve from that in order to fit that bill for me.
No, I think he could get to that point, and the big thing that's dragging him down right now is just that he's still, the self-created stuff is not great. It's actually getting a lot better since I last looked at it. Part of that was that Bucks game where he had the 32 points and pretty much most of his 9 of 15 from 2 in that game was self-created. So that's somewhat encouraging. Is his creation usage, or we're rebranding that, so I got to get it right here. His passing creation, which is basically the percentage of plays in which he throws a potential assist or a free throw assist, is up to 13%. That's higher than it was a year ago. So is he ever going to be your number one offensive option point guard type? No. The archetype that you're focusing on, of course, with him is Derek White. And White is a better off-ball player around the rim defensively, but Suggs is definitely way better on ball than Derek White. Like they both are sort of like kind of point guards, kind of not struggled with their shooting early in their careers, but now it's come on. I actually am not that worried about Suggs' shooting. I think he's just taking very, very difficult shots for this team from three. That's a good question, actually. Let's take a look at that number of what you would expect Jalen Suggs to be shooting from three on the attempts that he's taking. Yeah, he's got taking a pretty hard shot diet of expected 36%. Now he is shooting worse than that, but he's taking a lot of contested shots. And I would say even that number might understate it because he's shooting a lot on the move, which our numbers aren't really able to account for that well. So I think his shooting is going to be good enough. I think his playmaking is getting better. He's a really high character guy, hard worker, and one of the best defensive guards in basketball. So I think that could be the third best player on a championship team. I'm more like, if Franz and Paolo get to the level of being a first and second best player on a championship team, I have no doubt that Suggs could fulfill that third role. Let's get to our next question here, since we lost Danny for just a second. And that is, if you were the Magic GM, would you trade Wemby for both Franz and Paolo? Or trade Franz and Paolo for Wemby? This is from the Magic standpoint. That's a tough one. Danny, are you back? The cable gods are not helping here. All right, give us a second. We got to actually reconnect for the podcast. All right, well, quickly here, you can look at this cool bar in front of my face. Maybe can I just take that off? There we go. How about that? All right, I'll have to remember to put that back on eventually. So let's see, what do we got here in terms of questions? Should be looking into the fact that both Paul and Franz suffered the same injury. I don't think so. I think that's, I mean, and if we look into it, we're not going to find something. I guess what I might point to would be maybe like they're doing something in the weight room, like some specific exercise that the training staff has them doing, and they hurt their obliques while they're doing that, or something. I would be really surprised though if that were the case. So I mean, I think it's just an unhappy coincidence, honestly. Most realistic path for the Magic to become a real contender in the next 3 seasons. That's just having Franz and Paolo completely blow up. I think that's the biggest thing, and getting more shooting without compromising the defense. But it's all internal improvement. I would say at this point, those guys have been ahead of schedule pretty much every step of the way, and like having 2 really good guys who can score on the wing and also defend, as we've seen. They're not quite the same type of players. I mean, both those guys are arguably more power forwards who can masquerade as small forwards. All right, Danny is back in our podcast software. You want to jump in on the StreamYard again too? Okay. That's well, we'll write an angry letter to our Comcast men. Yeah. Well, sometimes the software can't deal with the fact that the internet has cut out, and then it'll freeze. You get that a lot. Yeah. All right. I'll keep interacting here. But yeah, so Franz and Paolo are not exactly like Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, because those guys are both threes, and so there's a little bit more versatility involved there. Both those guys are better shooters earlier in their careers than Franz and Paolo, but still, those guys can both guard threes okay. And then, they also cause a lot of matchup problems for anyone smaller who's guarding them. All right, you are in.
Yay!
Let's throw up our awesome brand banner again. I will be Nate Duncan again, and you can be Danny Leroux again.
Fine.
And all right, I will pick up again here. Why don't you just take the next question that you want to in like 5 seconds?
Sure. Well, we got a couple of questions that are on a similar thread. One from Sunstone, one from Corbin Ford, asking about the Magic upgrading with a more established offensive player. And I think that their front office should definitely consider it. I think that it's, the idea of the Magic being a truly dominant team requires a better offense than they have. But I don't know that move has to happen right now. And they're challenging finances for it whenever you do it, but they might be more challenging right now, depending on how they're structuring it.
Well, I think they just only have 5-6 games of seeing Franz and Paolo together this year, and I don't know that I would want to make a big move before I see what it looks like with, like, if Franz is going to shoot a little bit better, Paolo was shooting a little better early. Like, if you can get more off ball from those guys, and then Suggs, I think he's going to be fine as a shooter. KCP has really struggled, but he'll get it together, I would expect. And then you also throw in the possibility of just, what you have to give up to get that player. And this is a team that has drafted reasonably well. So with that being the case, maybe I would hold off. I've been very much driving the train, as I'm sure Corbin knows, that they should try to acquire someone like Simons. But Simons also is not having the greatest year. So I think I actually would kind of chill for a little bit and really see how the improvement from the outside from Paolo and Franz that we've seen early on holds up, because then maybe that isn't your greatest need in the end.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair way to put it. Let's see if there are any other. Let's see. From what you've seen of, did you answer the Anthony Black question?
No, not yet.
I think we do that quickly from Drew Doggy. What you've seen of Anthony Black so far, does he have enough upside to be a starter? Will he always be a defensive utility piece off the bench? I continue to really like Anthony Black's floor game. And so the question is, I don't think of him right now as good a defender as like Dyson Daniels. And also Dyson Daniels has grown in some of the other elements of his game. The other challenge as a starter, I mean, and you're thinking about this more in the abstract than for the Magic specifically. I think it's better to think of somebody as starting caliber, not context dependent starter, is that he's a worse version of some of the guys they already have. And so it would be harder for him to do it. But the threshold for guard sized player who isn't the greatest at running an offense is really, really high.
I've been impressed that he's shown a little bit more juice off the pick and roll this year, a little bit more as a finisher. He had a couple of finishes in that Bucks game that looked really good. He has, as we noted, reworked his shot, still is very low volume, probably never going to be a guy, like maybe he'll make open ones, but I don't think he's ever going to be, a real shooting threat. And I also don't think he's necessarily someone who is going to be a primary pick and roll threat. So that says like luxury third guard. Like if he could boost the shooting a little bit more, then maybe he is a potential starter. And you kind of, because they have Franz and Paolo, you could kind of get away with him maybe as a starter in that KCP spot later, playing next to Suggs, because he's just like, they have basically four guys who can kind of be the point guard. And so it's really a point guard by committee sort of approach. But then if he also can't be the worst shooter among those four guys when he also is probably going to be the worst on-ball player of the four of them. So defensively, it's great. I think he's gotten stronger too. I want to see what it looks like with him switching on to larger players. Like that's something that can be really powerful, is if you have someone who can play the one or the two that can switch on to a four, or someone like a Jason Tatum, and he's not just like meat necessarily. And I'm impressed. I thought, is he going to have one of these body types where he just can't get stronger? Like that hasn't been the case. I think he looks like a man out there now this year, which he didn't last year. So definitely very solid improvement. Like I never thought he wasn't going to be a quality player even when drafted. I just felt like there was a ceiling on, you would always kind of be having this question, like, is he a starter? Is he a third guard? Like he's probably, could he be one of the top 30 point guards in basketball? Sure. But then you run into the issue of how well he fits next to other players if he's not going to shoot that well. Again, I'm encouraged that he's changed his form around, that he's recognized that he has to get better, and we'll see what dividends that approach yields even after these. I think he's making progress, so you just don't know how far he's going to be able to get with it. Let's get to Philly now. Yeah.
The
they
Philadelphia
are
70.
We're out of rhythm. We've just had too many short stints. As soon as we get going, the coach takes us out. All right, go ahead, please.
7-15 on the season, but a far more respectable 5-4 since the last time we did a 15-60 on them. -5 net rating is 25th, 27th on offense, 11th on defense. And they're projected by BPI to finish with 41 wins. They're basically in a tie with the Hawks for, I believe, the 8th seed now on BPI. And we got a couple of questions, not surprisingly, on the same basic thread. Craig Lavoie asked one basically about the odds that Philly steers into a tank. And I think the place to start with that conversation is actually Derek Bodner did a good piece for PHLY, which he also put on his newsletter, talking through parts of it. And the important element to understand here, I think, from Bodner's piece for the short version here is, in order to have a real chance, a significant chance, more than a coin flip, of keeping their top 6 protected pick, Philadelphia would need to have the 5th worst record or worse. That if basically the way the lottery odds work, you have a 46% chance if you have the 6th worst odds of keeping your pick, and then it gets further bleak from there. So it's not only about steering into the tank, it's how far are these teams ahead, behind, however you want to define terms here, at the point that you make the decision.
And there's 3 main components of this. Number one is just that it's so hard to get there, right? Like the being top 6 protected. The Raptors went through this last year. Like the fact that the Raptors of last year couldn't keep their pick is pretty remarkable. And then because top 6 protected is just really hard to get into, right? Being one of the 5 worst records is really difficult, particularly some of the awful teams that are on. So that's one problem. The other one is just that there's always going to be hope, right? With the talent that they have, even if things are going really poorly, and they're not going to, by the way, like they are playing better. We'll talk more about that in a second. But that the 10th seed is always going to be so low that it's just better for them to go for that. Their chance of like getting the 10th seed and getting into the playoffs is going to be higher than it would be of keeping their pick, basically no matter what their record realistically could be. I mean, unless Maxey, George, and Embiid all go down for like the next 2 months, they're going to be within range of that.
And like you said, it probably has to be early if that sort of hellscape scenario is going to happen. It can't happen in February. It has to happen now.
Well, and then you also throw in like some of these teams, you might be like, all right, forget it, right? Like there's no point in going for the 10th seed. Let's just try to get a higher draft pick because what can we possibly do as the 10th seed? But Philly, with the talent that they have, they are always going to be able to convince themselves like they probably think, hey, if we get to the 10th seed, we're going to win those 2 games. And then not only that, but we can give the Boston Celtics or the Cleveland Cavaliers a run in the first round, even like, because they have that level of talent, that level of aspiration. So what are the odds that they would actually end up like legitimately trying to tank and truly keep that top 6 protected pick? 3%. Like it's incredibly low. Yeah.
Millman 16 asked about Embiid's extension. Did they have to do it before the season, or could they have waited and done it during the season? And I believe so because he was under contract.
So here's the answer for it. Yeah. So he had 2 years left on his deal. So he would have had to, and that was before the player option. So he declined the player option and then signed a 2+1 on top of that. But because he had 2 years left on his deal, he could not have signed it during the season. So it's either now or do it at the end of the season.
Yeah, basically now or a year from now. So
or not now, before the season, I should say.
Yes. Yeah, that's it. And so they that was an inflection point when you consider the year that Embiid had. It was a complicated situation for management I guess less complicated to some extent for Joel Embiid. We could go to this question from Dan.
Well, here. So quickly, there was another part of this too.
You're right.
It says, if Embiid is just done and the Sixers wanted to trade PG, what team would actually be interested? What could they get for him? If he starts playing at a level more consistent with his career? Yeah, I think it would be something along the lines of like a pick or 2 and, hopefully some not too terrible a salary. But you would think that a team like Miami, Golden State, one of these kind of older teams that are like Phoenix, I don't know how much they have to trade. And I don't know if Philly would be interested in taking back Bradley Beal, but certainly if they could get Paul George, they would love to. Like there'd be a lot of teams that would be interested, I would guess, even given because the Lakers would surely be interested. They could cobble together the salary. They have even enough matching salary if they needed to. They have a couple of unprotected picks that they could trade. So there are teams that are basically, with the Denver Nuggets try to make a deal.
Ooh. Well, remember there were rumors that at least they kicked the tires with the Clippers back when Paul George was deciding on his option.
Yeah, and I think the Nuggets with some of their young guys might have enough. Now, Porter Jr. or Jamal Murray would have to be the matching salary. You do run into some issues with a lot of these teams as well, with probably having to get a third team involved to make the money work, as with apron hard caps, stuff like that. So let's just talk about this briefly, because I thought Joel, it looked pretty decent since he came back. He came through that first game without any issues. Apparently, he's getting a fair amount of time off during this rest period for everybody else in the league at the moment. And like the 2 things that I saw from him that really made me feel good about things was that like he missed a shot around the basket and popped right back off the floor quickly to get the rebound. And that's a move that shows that you've got a little bit in your legs. I thought very early in the season he looked extremely heavy-legged around the basket, and just the overall level of aggressiveness, right? Like he took 28 shots in I think it was 31 or 32 minutes in that first game back. So I thought he was, like I said, at the end of that Miami game, and then I think it was the Memphis game right after that. Like he started showing the aggressiveness, showing some belief. Paul George is also wearing a knee brace now. So I don't know. I mean, again, we'll have to see it over a long period of time, but based on where Joel was, I was relatively encouraged by what we saw from him in his return.
So was I, and it does remain to be seen, over the grind. Once the grind comes back, how it'll fare. But good to see that as a starting point of this sort of a return. Actually, I'll do the one from KJ Martin Believer first. If you're Joe Murray at the deadline, do you prioritize getting a true 4 or trying to get a playable scoring guard wing? For me, it's a 4. I think that even though,
particularly with McCain's emergence.
Yes, and it would be great to get somebody who could do get people to answer both of those questions. But power forward, especially with the teams that they're hoping to go against in the playoffs, you need something better than what they have so far.
Yeah, I think so. And just rebounding, more athleticism, the ability to play small. Like they need someone to help out on the glass, someone who could be a secondary rim protector. Now, is that player available? Maybe not, but just generally more size and athleticism is a huge need for this group. What sort of outcomes and expectations are realistic for Jared McCain, given his play so far this season? I think it seems like something along the lines of, he's not exactly this type of player, but is he going to be in that scoring guard, combo guard archetype? Your Tyler Hero, Jordan Poole, Anthony Simons, like that seems like kind of what he is. Cam Thomas is probably a little bit worse of a passer than those guys. I'm not sure he's like quite in the same category. Like Cam Thomas is really more of a pure shooting guard than a combo guard, I would say. And we'll also have some of the defensive limitations. So is McCain a pure point guard? We had some of these same issues about Maxey, and Maxey, although he has disappointed this year, like he's going to need to start playing better again. I think Joel can really help him with that. Like in that Bulls game, those guys got the chemistry going again, and he assisted Embiid on a bunch of buckets in his 19-point second quarter. But I'm not going to say Jared McCain can't be an all-star at this point, but I think it's too early to put that in a box. Like he clearly is an NBA player. I think he's going to be a good scorer in the league for a long time. That's about as far as I'm willing to go right now. And we'll have to see him move into playing more of a role. Like he had all he could eat during that initial stretch with everyone out.
I want to see what Jared McCain looks like a few years from now as a creator, like a pick and roll operator, because I really like his judgment overall. And I think he could end up kind of bridging a little bit of a different gap than like Maxey kind of got beyond the Poole Hero group, unless Tyler Hero keeps shooting the way it is, by being more of a true point guard. But I think McCain is a more intuitive passer, but he's not the athlete that Tyrese Maxey is. And so we haven't really seen, when you think about those players who move into the higher levels, unless you are a superlative shooter like Stephen Curry. And Curry is, I think, an underappreciated athlete overall. We haven't seen that kind of player, like Damian Lillard was so much more athletic than Jared McCain coming into the league and all those type of guys. We haven't seen somebody, be like a top 10 point guard with this kind of set in a while. It's possible. I like McCain's tools more than most of these guys, but it's going to take time. And it's going to take a lot of not only physical development, but I would say in some ways more mental development.
Yeah, he's been kind of a scorer of opportunity a little bit more. It's not like he's been getting a lot of his stuff of just line up the pins, run a pick and roll, and get the guy on his back, snake into the lane, make a decision, be unguardable in that way. It's more just they push it up, he fires up a quick three, they move the ball to him. I think he's been very good at working out of closeouts and keeping the churn going. Transition's been big for him. Once he's got in the lane, he has made pretty good decisions, but it hasn't necessarily just been like the primary guy, excuse me, creating the advantage. All right, I think that's probably. Oh yeah, this is a good one from Garrett, friend of the program. Good to Hear from you, Garrett. Former student at SBC, in fact. He asks about PG and Embiid, and he says it's your turn, my turn. What can they do to get those two more in sync offensively? And part of the reason for that might be because the Maxey and Embiid already have the chemistry, and they probably work a little bit better. Whereas PG working off the ball around those two guys is probably the best option. And you'd like to be able to run more screens for PG off the ball, but you probably want to set that screen with your center, or the opposing team is just going to switch that.
Right.
And so I think that is going to be an important element of their offense to diversify. But recall that Embiid has worked with someone not quite the same as Paul George in JJ Redick, because Redick is one of the best off-ball movers we've ever seen. But PG can come off the screens, off the ball, certainly. Like if you start with Embiid setting a wide pin down for Paul George, and Paul George is being guarded by someone that can't switch onto Embiid, which is going to be the case most of the time, I think Embiid will need to continue to work on his off-ball movement, switching out, slipping those screens, or you start with that wide pin down for George, see if that yields anything. If it doesn't, then he can dump it in quickly to Embiid, out of more of a free-flowing set than just a static post-up.
Yeah, I think that's really fair, and it's going to be a number of different things because you can run some Embiid PG like actions like pick and rolls and stuff, but you could do a lot of other things too. And I like that you brought up Redick, because even though Paul George has a more diverse offensive game, that is something you can use kind of in the interim and everything else. Let's get to the Raptors.
Well, here, let's take a couple of these questions.
Oh, sure.
If we can. Long John Silver says, the worst podcast you've ever done. The one that really went to shit. That's a good question. I would have to really go back and think about that. I mean, the good news is that for most of this, we haven't actually done these live.
Yeah. I mean, I remember we had one. Oh no, I can't remember if that was with you or if that was for Real GM, where it was 14 segments for me to stitch together. I can't remember if that was an early version of ours.
Yeah, maybe it was. I mean, I guess it was probably the worst podcasts were the ones when I was didn't know any better. It was just using my laptop mic to record. Those would be. And then we had some because when you're uploading it to Real GM in the very early days, there was some crazy product, because it wasn't actually hosted on a podcast hosting company. So we had no idea how many people were listening. All we knew is that it was really high in the Apple charts. And so we had to switch over to a different host, but it was just being hosted on a website, and somehow it had an RSS feed. It was really, really antiquated technology early on. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure there have been some ones where one of our physical conditions were very poor in some facet or another. I mean, there definitely have been times when I've recorded podcasts when I had COVID before, or where I just, every single time I talked, I was holding off this tickle in my throat, and then as soon as I would be done, I would just mute the shit out of my microphone and just devolve into this massive coughing fit. So probably something like that.
Does Goga Bitadze or Wendell Carter have higher trade value? I think Wendell Carter does, because we just saw Goga Bitadze not get a ton of interest. I mean, 3 years, 25 is better than my memory had been about what his contract was, but Wendell Carter is a little bit more established with quality. You could argue that, especially if Bitadze starts shooting threes, that they could be closer.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, there just would be more places that Carter could fit due to his shooting and defensive versatility. And what could Detroit do to become a playoff contender? Draft a superstar. I mean, to get into the playoffs, I think they could just continue with this group, draft who they draft this year. JB will get them to play hard. They could make the playoffs this year. I think they're going to make the play in at least. But as far as a team that's going to be a top 4 team in their conference, which I consider to be the standard of what any team should be shooting for in a rebuild, that they're going to need another player who's better than anyone on the roster, I would say, or at least maybe Cade becomes that guy, and they need someone who's as good as Cade is now.
Yeah.
And then here's another good one: Orlando or Houston situation right now.
I mean, both teams, I think, need that best player on a X level team, in order to do it. I'm not a believer that Şengün is that guy, and then Van Vliet and all that kind of stuff. I think Paolo has the best chance. Their players overlap more, but I think that the thing that concerns me a little bit about the Rockets, as good as they are, like I think they can be this level of team for a while, is that unlike the Magic, they're leaning heavily on guys that could have regression a little bit sooner and they I think they can replace Brooks okay, but with VanVleet, they don't really have one. So I think I would go Magic right now, but I think it's close.
Yeah, Magic have the two best guys, and Suggs would probably be right up there too. I mean, I don't want to go through ranking every single one, but Suggs to me would be, certainly in the like top three.
Oh, and that's true.
Rockets,
since Jared was said it was young core, then you don't even include some of the guys I was talking about.
Well, yeah, I kind of expanded it out a little bit, so sorry for summarizing it that way. But I think it just the overall, the young core of just here are the players you can't do anything to add to them. Yeah, I would rather have Orlando. When we do our young cores, I would probably have Orlando higher than Houston, unless a lot changes. But Houston has more outs, and they have a lot more assets going forward and more flexibility. So I probably would rather be in Houston's situation, but it's very close. Okay, let's get back to this. We'll hit a few more of these questions later. But what is our next team?
The Toronto Raptors, 7-18 on the season, but a far more respectable 4-6. Since the last 50 to 60, 22nd in net rating, 20th on offense, which I think has actually improved a little bit recently. 21st on defense. BPI projects them to finish in a tie for the 13/14 seeds with the Charlotte Hornets. They actually have exactly the same win projection right now, which is 29. 4% chance of making playoffs. And we got a number of different questions.
Well, let's hit actually quick news on them.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so we, unfortunately, just as they're kind of getting Scotty Barnes back and then potentially, like, we're still kind of figuring things out with Emmanuel quickly, Barnes is hurt again. He came down on Karl-Anthony Towns. It seems like it's a multi-week sprained ankle issue. So that means we're getting a longer time, not only a longer time without Barnes, but it seems like if it's multi-week, that it's at least going to have more overlap between the non-Barnes time and the non-Suggs time.
Or non-Quickly time, you mean?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, well, and he still has this left UCL tear. That's the ligament in your elbow, the Tommy John ligament. He is, quote-unquote, progressing in his recovery. Has anyone not progressed in their recovery? I guess Lonzo Ball would be one. But I bet you that his update still said he was progressing in his recovery. But has not been cleared to ramp up or practice. I don't know. Paul George, it was like left elbow soreness or something a couple of years ago. And I think that was the 22 season. And that, it took him a while. It took him 2-3 months. Like, it seems like that might be kind of where we're headed on this one with Quickly. It's been about a month. I believe he had the pelvic contusion before that. So, like, if I'm not mistaken, I don't know if Quickly and Barnes have played a single minute together so far this year, but it's basically, if they have, it's few enough that it basically is nothing. And so you're just like, we got asked a couple of questions, like, where do the Raps go from here? And like this year, it just seems like, they're like, I think if they could ever get their group together, they could challenge for the play-in. And the play-in, I don't think is going to be running away from them necessarily. So
it's running away, but it's not running away from them. And
can we talk about that actually for a second here? So here's your BPIs for the bottom teams in the East. Wizards 20, Raps are next with 29, Hornets are also 29, Pistons 33, Pacers 33, Nets 36, Bulls 37. I don't know why they like the Bulls so much. Hawks 40, Sixers 40. So you're looking at basically Bulls, Nets, Pacers, Pistons, that's 4, Hornets, Raptors, Wizards. So that's 7 teams. 2 of those teams have to make the play-in. Who are they going to be? I mean, the Pacers seem like they're just going to go for it. Like, they're not, they never tank. So, and like Pacers and Pistons would probably be my prediction.
I think the Pistons are better than the Bulls, but I don't know that they're better by that much. So yeah, I'll go Pacers and Pistons with the Bulls.
And the Bulls have the top 10 protected pick too.
Yes.
And the Bulls are also talking about trading guys away if they can. And if they can't, then I think they might ultimately go for the tank. But so all that's a way of saying, like, I'm trying to figure out, like, who is going to, like, because I think the Raptors, if they did, like, I think they are a team that actually would push for the play, and if they ever got their guys back. So, but of course, if they're just totally out of it, the other thing though is just they need to see these guys together. Like, it's just been, like, they have, like, last year they didn't see any of them together. Barnes immediately broke his hand, then he had a broken face, now he has the ankle. Quickly has had all these issues. Barrett had the terrible death of his brother. He didn't play much down the end of last year. So, I mean, at some point you got to see all these guys together and get at least a little bit of an understanding. But as noted in the question that we got, they don't really have a ton of optionality here other than just let's see who they get in the draft. They've gotten, seems like Jacoby Walter might be a player. Dick is looking like he could be a starter, a shooting guard. Like those, that's nice to at least get somebody in those roles who might be able to make a shot, which is not something that they had.
Well, and I mean, in terms of their lack of flexibility, the Raptors for 25-26 are at the cap line, not the tax line, at the cap line with nothing for Bruce Brown, with nothing for their other pending free agents. Boucher is probably the only one of note, maybe Davion. So it's when you're in that point, it's really hard to add because basically what you have is the mid-level exception. And then you could theoretically, if you can add money via a trade, you can do that. But I think that getting to Miles' question about like, where do they go from here? It's also a question. So it's part of it is, I'm not the biggest fan of Jakob Poeltl and the contract they gave him and all this type of stuff, but it's like, well, what are you doing if you get rid of them? And what are you gaining by that transaction? Because let's say it's Jakob Poeltl. I don't think you're getting out of that with zero money for 25-26, where all of a sudden you now have 20 million in space, and then their draft pick is going to take a huge chunk out of that. So you're probably moving them for like salary. RJ Barrett is probably a similar story because he has this year and 2 more in his contract. So unless a team makes you an offer that you feel is aggressive, maybe to the point of irresponsibility, not because their guys are so good, but because what are you getting out of it? You kind of keep things together, and you could argue, and I would, that this may end up leading to a better outcome for the Raptors long term because they probably weren't going to get as good a bite at the apple for another good player around Quickly and Barnes due to their salary structure. This pick being better is the shot that they weren't going to have before.
If they could get like a real starting 3, I think this group could actually be semi-interesting.
Same.
I do wish that Poeltl with some of the offensive improvement he's had, if he could just be the guy he was defensively earlier in his career, like that could be pretty interesting. I would just love it if RJ could be the 2 instead of the 3. Like every single team he's ever been on, he's had to play the 3. And I think that does him a disservice because if he were being matched up with 2s, he could use that bully ball game a lot more and also not be thrust into this kind of wing stopper position that I think he's miscast for as well. We got asked if he's meaningfully better. I mean, meaningfully means like it has changed something about our overall opinion of him or what the franchise could think of him. I don't think so. Obviously 30% usage is too much for him at this point. He's had to shoot off the dribble a lot more. I mean, I think the one thing he's shown is more passing ability off the pick and roll, but I think he probably always had that. He just wasn't playing on a team. Like I joked around, even like when he was the only one of the big 3 who was available early in the year, that he still was playing on a lineup that had more spacing than he's ever had before. Like in that Nuggets game. So I don't know about meaningfully better. He hasn't changed my opinion of him particularly.
I think that RJ is an improved version of the same basic player. And and so how do you define that? And we got a question about Ochai Agbaji. I am really pleased that he's having a better year after just a disastrous 23-24 campaign. But Agbaji, he's making 46% of his threes as a career 35% shooter. And his best year other than this was 35-5 that first year with the only full year he had with the Jazz. And it's also the best 2-point finishing, which is impressive when you consider the spacing that the Raptors often don't have. But if you're going to say, like, I think his shooting is way better than it was last year. I thought that, I don't know what happened, but that was more the anomaly. But I'm thinking more like 36-37, not 46-47.
Curious if you have thoughts on Jonathan Mobo. He talked about his defense on Luka, which I think was a 30-point blowout. I didn't see that particular game, and he's someone I would like to. He and Walter are both guys I'd like to focus in on more. And I will admit I haven't watched as much Raptors of late because generally when teams aren't whole, I don't watch as much of them because I'm just sort of like I want to see everybody in context and get an idea for them. But now that it seems like guys are just going to be out forever, I'm going to have to watch more of them without with them kind of being less watchable, but I'll just deal with that. But I think the thing that I've liked about Mobo to start with is, especially for a second round rookie, like the reason he got drafted in the second round and not earlier, despite his college production, was just he's kind of a weird fit on the offensive end, doesn't really shoot it, too small to be a center, but he does a lot of things offensively, and then he can operate in short areas in the paint, make some passes, finish around the basket, be really active in transition, got a little ball handling skill. And so that's a weird player. It's not someone who's necessarily going to get drafted in the first round. But the big thing that's been important to me is, does the stuff that he is supposed to be good at actually translate, right? Like and that has been the case so far. So he is a little bit of a square peg to fit in to basically any type of team, and particularly this one, although I think his fit with the Linux could be an interesting one on the second unit. I want to see that evolve more. But at least the fact that, like, hey, he does have these strengths. Like, that's at this point in his development for a kind of a weird player like that, where you're just like, oh yeah, it's kind of a pain in the ass to fit him into some lineups, but he does some things, particularly defensively, that we just don't have. And like the stuff, like he's going to have some negatives, but at least we know he also has some positives.
I really appreciate how hard Jonathan Mobo plays. And he does that on the offensive glass and on the defensive end. He's been pretty productive as a playmaker. He's about a 2.5 steal rate and block rate so far. And the limitations, hopefully they're temporary, but you never know. Like, is the shooting ever going to come around? He's not taking them at real volume. He's also not getting to the line a ton. And sometimes when a guy's active on the glass, you'd like to see that kick in a little bit more. But I trust that he can do this stuff well. And it, especially when you're power forward sized and you're pretty strong, I think that there's a place within an NBA rotation for you. And so that's really good. And is there a starting place? Well, not unless there's development in the weaknesses, but the strengths being this good, to me, makes him an NBA player.
Another question about whether Scottie Barnes' playmaking is sustainable. And I would say largely yes. Like, that is, when things are more about style of play than success of play, yeah, I do think it's sustainable. Now, it may not be sustainable in the sense that he's going to get the ball as much, right? Like, if they just haven't had any other guards, they haven't had anyone else to give the ball to other than Barrett. If you give, like, they're not going to let Davion Mitchell run a bunch of pick and roll. So I think that part of it, maybe just the amount of opportunity isn't the same, but like, playmaking is something that you can do more of, and it's not where it's like, oh, he's shooting 45% from three for a month. It's because, like, there's just much more of an intentionality to it. So Scottie Barnes' playmaking usage this year, Danny, or as we're rebranding it, his passing creation this year, 19.1%. That is a huge number that he is setting up one of his teammates on 19.1% of all possessions when he's on the floor. And that's like a top 10 in the league number. That's higher than James Harden.
Wow.
And higher than Jalen Brunson. LeBron is at 20.3%. Trey is at 25.2. That's the league leader. I think Jokic, he might even be, is he third in the league? That would be crazy. Anyway, it's a massive, massive increase. And so very encouraging to see. Now, if they actually get anybody who can knock down some shots, that might be even better. But yeah, it's very limited sample. We're going to be without him again for a while, which is very frustrating. Okay, let's get to the Wiz here now, Danny, if we must.
And we must. The Washington Wizards are 3-19 on the season, 1-8 since the last 15 and 60. They're dead last in not only net rating, but offensive rating and defensive rating, which is quite the triple. They're projected to still win 20 games by BPI. That is, of course, last in the East. And we could start with this question from Jacob Moskowitz. Will Washington win double-digit games this year? And I believe you're better on this, but I believe only one team has ever not won double-digit games in a 82-game season.
Yeah, that's the 73 Sixers, I think. I can't remember. It's one of those 70s years, but yeah, they were 9-73, and then I think the Sixers team that got Sam Hinkie fired was 10-72.
Yeah, but so I think they will. And first of all, they're not going to play as badly as they have so far, even though you could argue that their talent level may decline. And I hope that it does over the year because they can give more minutes to some of their young guys and everything else. Also, I'd rather see Kyle Kuzma, we'll get more on him in a second, in a situation where he is forced to be more serious. I think that would be fun for the league and for him. So I think they will. And then the other dynamic to remember here is that if the Wizards are that much worse than everyone else, then when the other teams really like aggro tank, then the Wizards kind of won't, and because they'll have a buffer. And so they'll probably get cheapies.
But how could they actually win games? Like, especially if they make a couple of trades, like what is the mechanism by which they're actually going to win games, regardless of whether they're trying?
Yeah, I mean, Jordan Poole can have some big offensive games. I think their defense will tighten up a little bit, especially, but they don't have that many good defenders on the team. It's hard. It's hard, man.
So we got asked this question of just like, how could Alex Sarr have 46% true shooting? And the answer is that he's just having one of the worst shooting seasons in NBA history right now. So again, we have numbers where we call it simple shot quality, where we just measure what percent would a league average shooter make on shots from this area contested by this amount. And that's actually not bad. For a center, it's a little bit lower than you might expect because he takes threes, 56.8%. Alex Sarr is shooting 13.3% worse from the field than you would expect given the shots that he's taking. On team-created shots, his field goal percentage is 42.9. He's shooting 25% from three. They're still letting him shoot that, and he's getting pretty open shots, too. So yes, he's shooting 12% worse from three than would have been expected, which, of course, is atrocious. He is shooting 17% on uncontested threes.
Whoa. And he has a lot of them, too.
Yeah, he's shooting 34.5% on long twos, and he also is one of the worst finishing centers in captivity as well. 44.2% contested finishing inside of 10 feet.
Well, and
so
that gets...
the guy
and that
just can't make the basketball go in the basket.
He can't. I mean, the thing that's interesting, though, about that is that Basketball Reference doesn't do contested, uncontested. Sarr is actually converting 71% of his shots inside the restricted area, but the problem is that he's just not kind of taking enough in the sense like he gets those dunks, but then everything else that's contested, it's not going in. And so those are a higher proportion. Also, he's been taking a lot of floater range shots and so Alex Sarr, he's taking 42% of his shots from three. That's unusually high for even for some fours. But it's that he's taking almost as many shots from 3 to 10 feet as he is from 0 to 3. And you don't want that if you're not good at 3 to 10 feet, which he has been horrendous, but 32%. So there are a lot of concerns there. But in terms of the original question, like, again, I thought Alex Sarr was going to be bad on defense start. I didn't think he was going to be this bad, but I mean, we'll see where the full season
on defense or offense?
On offense.
Okay.
I think that's like you see some of the defensive flashes. I mean, it hasn't been as consistent as I would like, but it's not like I would be way more scared if that film was worse to my eye.
Yeah, he's at least contesting a lot. 42% contest percentage. It hasn't been as effective. The Wiz perimeter defense obviously is atrocious as well. He's getting pushed around quite a bit. I mean, he really has more of the body of a four. Like, he shouldn't be going up against a lot of these centers. Like the one time I've seen him in person so far, I had pretty close seats, and like he just was getting absolutely dominated physically by Jalen Duren and Isaiah Stewart, who are two beefy guys, to be fair. But I mean, offensively, he's just being asked to do way too much. And is that an indication that he's never going to be the guy that we hoped that he would be offensively? Maybe. I mean, I didn't actually have that high hopes for him on the offensive end. I thought it was going to be, maybe he'll get some alley-oops now and then. He might be able to bring the ball up and hand off to guys. I didn't think he would get all the way to the basket. And I thought he would shoot it okay, which has obviously not been the case so far, and we'll see. I mean, watching him warm up before that Pistons game, I was pretty discouraged by where his jumper is at right now. And like, is he just, I mean, there have been guys like this in history, not that many of them, who are just at the lower levels. They're just of like, oh yeah, I'm a shooter, I just shoot at these bigs, and then they just never actually get good at making it. Like, there's not that many of those guys. Usually if the guy's allowed to shoot it by his team and coaches when he's younger, like, there's at least something there. But I tell you that when I've seen him in person, I can't say that I've noticed that at all. But so what's happening is he's being, I don't know if he's even being asked to do way too much, but he is trying to do way too much. And, he's taking, like, even the quality of his threes is not amazing. Like, he's not only taking it when he's wide open, and he's trying to do, more stuff off the dribble and like shoot some long twos and post up and stuff. And it's just like, yeah, they're trying to allow him to explore the studio space. He's a second overall pick, but it's been so unbelievably awful that I do think they should think about scaling that back at least a little bit. But of course, there's not really anyone else who's so much better to take on that usage.
That's true. And that gets into another question that I think was from Jay Nico, asking about Kyle Kuzma's trade value. And the good news for the Wizards, and theoretically for suitors, is that Kuzma, his contract is a little bit more than $20 million a year. It's higher this year. It's descending, as the Wizards like to do.
Yeah. But I mean, my favorite joke of the year is like, is his play or his contract descending faster? I would say it's the play right now.
It's the play for right now. But what that means is that Kuzma is more acquirable by some of these teams that have some salary constraints, because he doesn't make that much money. It's not like Jeremy Grant, who by comparison, Jeremy Grant this year makes $29.8 and Kuzma's making 23.5. So for certain teams, that matching, like, theoretically a return to the Lakers, that kind of stuff would be there. But when you consider the way that Kuzma has played so far, I think that there's reason to believe, and I do believe this, that Kuzma can be a better version of himself than what he has been in a different situation. But I don't know why you would roll those dice and give up assets for it. Like, if you want to roll those dice, by all means, because the forwards are hard to come by, and maybe he can be better on defense and he won't take as many bad shots when he doesn't have the ball in his hands as much. But in terms of trade value, I'm not there. But the thing that I always remember with guys that I dislike far more than the norm is that it only takes one or two. And I believe that those one or two exist.
Yeah, I'm just not sure what contending team he is going to start for. Like that's really what it comes down to, is who is he going to be enough of an upgrade for at that combo forward position that he would start for. Like, there are teams that in theory the better version of him could help, that just have nothing at the 3 or the 4, but they're not really trying to add something at this point in time. I thought last year's Mavericks were a very instructive example. I think it sounds like they kind of made the same offer for Kuzma as they ended up making for PJ Washington. And in the end, Kuzma didn't want to go there. The Wiz turned him down. And then they ended up PJ Washington. I think PJ Washington, especially for what he has been in Dallas, I didn't think it at the time, but it's been way better than Kuzma. Like, he's more physical. I think he's about the same, maybe even slightly better as a spot-up shooter. And, he's just, I think he's just better defensively. He provides a little secondary rim protection. Kuzma's rebounding is never particularly impressed. So, yeah, I mean, is there a shitty first that you could get for Kuzma if you also take back bad money? I think that's possible. But, like, this is one of those times where we usually get into this discussion in terms of draft picks of guys where it's like, the things you're worried about, if that then shows up in Summer League or it shows up early on in their first season, then you kind of lean into that more as far as what your prior was, because you already kind of suspected this was the case. And yeah, Kuzma is not going to shoot 49% true shooting all season, but it also, you kind of worried about like, all right, how good is this guy really? How well does he really defend? He's kind of was more adequate even when he was playing a role, and his jump shot as a spot up guy was never like unbelievably threatening. Like he got a lot of Tobias Harris to him, I would say as well.
Mm-hmm.
Another guy who just never really was fully able
The
to play that
Sixers
supporting
need a
role.
4, Nate. The Sixers need a
Yeah,
4.
but not that kind of four. Like they
No,
need someone who can do more on the defensive end. So
I agree.
as I scroll through it here, I struggle to think of like what team would want to give up a first for him. Like, would he like would the Indiana Pacers would be useful? They're out of pick already in the future, by the way. But would they be interested? Like, actually, a team like the Clippers could use him, but not a team that has any assets to give up either. The Lakers, how much of an upgrade is he truly on Rui Hachimura? Is that the direction you want to go? I mean, trading Hachimura back to the Wizards for Kuzma would be one of the funniest fucking things I've ever seen in my life. But the Memphis doesn't really have much interest. Miami, it's like, yeah, they could like kind of use some scoring, but it's just the magnitude of his skills is not that high. So I would not be interested in trading for Kyle Kuzma on this contract, despite what his brand has been. Milwaukee's another one. They don't have the matching salary. That's another issue. I actually think he wouldn't be terrible in Milwaukee, but again, they would rather have I guess the thing is, if your team is good enough that you're giving up assets to upgrade and go for winning a championship, you already have probably 2 and probably 3 offensive players who are better than Kyle Kuzma. And so you're asking him to play a 3-and-D type of role, and that's not his raison d'etre. You got to kind of shoehorn him into that role.
Before we leave the Wizards, I want, and we'll acknowledge Wizard Film Room asked for quick hitters on the rookies. I think I want to save that for more substantial hitters on future 15 and 60s.
Yeah, I want to really lock in on that. I would want to see more there.
But one thing that I've been tracking is with the Wizards, I'm not going to say quest because I don't know if it's something they want, to potentially get to -20 including the glass net rating. Their next 2 games are against the Cavs and the Celtics. It's possible.
All right, let's hit some news.
Well, I guess it's important to discuss whether Jimmy Butler has requested a trade, has told other teams where he would like to go, but it's certainly very important to Bernie Lee. It's certainly somewhat important to Shams.
Yeah, Bernie Lee accusing Shams of lying, saying that Bernie Lee is talking to other teams, saying that Butler would want to get traded there. I ultimately don't give a crap about that particular aspect of the dialogue, because if it makes sense to trade him, he'll be traded. If it makes sense to extend him, he'll be extended. I still think that the most likely outcome is he finishes in a Heat uniform. The amount of money that he makes this year, not to mention what his possible future contract demands might be, make it extremely difficult to come up with the salary. I mean, you're looking, let's say the Warriors, right? I would say of all the teams that have been talked about, he makes the most sense with the Warriors. He's trying to say the Nets, I would be just absolutely shocked.
There's a reason
this offseason.
There's a reason why he's saying the Nets, and that's because Brooklyn's basically the only team with cap space. And so he's like, see, I can go somewhere else. Really, I can.
Yeah. But the Nets didn't trade for their own pick back to sign Jimmy Butler this offseason and push for the what seed again?
The 12 seed?
I mean, and again, there's no other free agent that is going to join Jimmy Butler there in Brooklyn. You know who else might be a free agent this offseason, Danny?
Bernie Lee.
That's good. Kyrie Irving. And Kyrie Irving and Jimmy Butler are buddies. Could they both go back? No, okay. All right. That's pretty sure Joe Tsai is probably done with that one. So what this comes down to, so let's say it's the Warriors. Andrew Wiggins probably got to be in that deal.
Either Wiggins or Draymond has to be in it.
Yeah. And I think Andrew Wiggins, the way he's played this year, he's going to come back from this ankle. Hopefully he'll be all right. But, and the way he's going to fit in, like I don't love the Draymond Jimmy fit. Like you'd have to play Draymond at the 5 and Butler at the 4, and that's kind of been an issue too with Bam and Jimmy as well. But Bam is more of a center on both ends, of course. So yeah, I and then for Miami, why are you trading him? Are you trading him to get assets? Like, is there something like you're not going to get anything for Jimmy Butler that's going to revolutionize your team? Like, that's just not going to happen. And Jimmy also, like, I mean, I think he would love to get traded somewhere and then have the leverage over that team of having just been traded for. But even if he does get traded somewhere and he opts out, I don't know how much leverage he would have. The biggest leverage that he has, frankly, would be, hey, I am owed $52 million next year, and I'm going to make you pay that if you don't opt me out, Rudy Gobert style, and pay me less, and that'll help you with your tax bill or signing other players or whatever. Like that's the biggest leverage he has, is the fact that he's already owed $52 million for next year, not that he can go get himself a 3-year deal at $55 million a year.
I think that's a really good point. And I mean, what team wants to give Jimmy Butler his next contract is a fascinating one, especially when I mean, he's a much better player than Kuzma, but you get into this situation of who does he elevate far enough for it to be worth it? And it's a challenging question, and other people will evaluate differently. While we're on the Heat, Pelle Larsson has missed 3 straight games due to a sprained right ankle. It's unfortunate that he's still not back, even after this kind of longer layoff that a lot of these teams are having. He will not play later on Thursday against the Raps.
Yeah, relatively light schedule again, I would assume, due to football, which is why all these teams are getting so much time off. Golden State, they didn't have Moses Moody, who they probably could have used last night as well, with left patellar tendinopathy. And he played Sunday against the Wolves, but the knee is an issue. This is one where they're probably going to shut him down for a little bit. And yeah, Kerr said that Wiggins was ready to go Tuesday, and then I guess he still had some swelling and didn't play on Wednesday with this ankle impingement. So they're going to need to get that right. They've got 3 days off until playing Sunday, another Klay Thompson return game against the NBA Cup vanquished Mavericks.
Can they get captain hats again that fast? I'm not sure. A couple of injury returns. The one I want to start with is Donovan Clingan. So Donovan Clingan, it was reported that he had a grade 2 sprained at left MCL. And he's been out roughly 2 weeks, and he was going to be reevaluated 2 weeks. And he practiced fully on Thursday and is questionable to play Friday. So either he's Wolverine or there was something with the reporting that's a little bit off.
Yeah, it just wasn't grade 2, or it was like incredibly mild grade 2. Like that's a timeline for a grade 1. And obviously grade 1 or grade 2, you don't sprain a ligament and it's just like, okay, like you can either tear it to this exact point and that's a grade 1. And then if you tear it to this exact point, it's a grade 2. Like obviously it's all, you could have a severe grade 1 or a mild grade 2. Like this, it's all a sliding scale. But yeah, that was a surprising destination, but I'm glad that he's going to be back. Rob Williams also out of the concussion protocol. Looks like he's on track to play Friday against San Antonio. And Scoot Henderson and Toumani Camara were also able to come back in their loss to the Lakers. It was a left quad contusion that had Henderson sidelined for 7 of the previous 8 games.
And a foot sprain for Camara. And then on the return front, Max Strus is coming back soon. It had been sounding like he was going to play against the Wizards. I believe that's now been walked back to that he's not going to play against the Wizards, but at least he's close. And considering we hadn't been getting much updates, I'm excited to see him back when he's back.
Yeah, he had practiced as well. And then Evan Mobley sprained his ankle in their last game before this little mini break. Questionable to play against the Wizards Friday, I would imagine, because it's the Wizards. They will just sit him and get him more time off.
DNP Wizards is definitely going to be a thing this year, though that happened again. Then the Nuggets did that and then they lost. So
yeah, they did.
That's how they get to double-digit wins, baby. Also on the return front, Patrick Williams. He's going to play, per Billy Donovan, off this left foot that he's been aggressively managing. Played 20 to 24 minutes. Kobe White said that Williams was great in scrimmage, And so, I mean, considering we didn't know what the deal was here, and it looked like it might be something that got worse. I mean, it sucks that he's missed this long, but at least it's not worse.
Yeah, and thanks by the way. I did know that it is Pelle Larsson in Swedish. Thanks for that note in the comments. I feel like I am already too officious, so I didn't want to make that correction, but the comments did it for us. And then this is big out of LA. It's always a soap opera with these guys, but Kawhi Leonard sounds like he's been ramping up. He's returned to practice on Tuesday, and Ty Lue said that he could return to game action within the next 2 weeks. He has not yet been cleared for contact, but like he was doing everything other than that. And this is generally, even Kawhi, there are enough tea leaves to read now about his return that it does seem like it could actually happen. Although, of course, that is barring any setbacks. And then Derek Jones Jr., right hamstring strain. He's, of course, plays an important role for them on the wing. He's going to be out for a couple weeks, averaging a little over 24 minutes a game. And then James Harden didn't play in their Swapper Bowl 3 loss to the Rockets with right groin soreness. And I would imagine he'll probably be back then. I mean, this is another one where it seems like anybody who had any sort of an issue, they just held them out in these games Sunday and then these Thursday, Friday games because they have a chance to really like let them all get right.
Speaking of that, the Los Angeles team with a worse record right now, the Lakers, are LeBron. He had talked about wanting to play all 82 games. He missed that game Sunday that they won against the Blazers, and it sounds like he's not going to play on Friday's Lakers-Wolves game, and so he's going to miss a little bit of time. Like, we don't know exactly what's going on here. And then,
on LeBron, it's a little interesting to me. Again, I'm not sure what's happening in terms of LeBron's personal life. It wasn't a quote-unquote excused absence on Wednesday, but you would think for a team that's really been struggling so badly, I mean, maybe because he's got this foot, he wasn't going to practice anyway, so there's no reason for him to be around. But JJ Redick's been talking about how disconnected they are. It seems like they could really use the practice time. And again, I don't know what's actually happening in his personal life. There could be something going on where he's missing time, but this is just raising my eyebrows slightly with the idea that, like, James had really played poorly. Like, he seemed kind of beaten down a little bit lately. That, like, there could be something going on here. Also, Bronny James is actually going to play in his first G League road game after missing a bunch of time. Like, he just needs the reps. So I'm glad that whole thing of like he's never going to play in a G League road game is over. They don't really have any games that he's going to play in at home here. So I just want to keep an eye on this one. Like, I'm not saying, like, this is like, all right, to me, there's a 5% chance that there's kind of more to this whole situation with LeBron. So I just want to put a pin on this and see what the story is. And maybe he just comes back and they wanted to get him a week off and it's all fine and nothing else going on. But it just feels a little odd.
It does feel odd. But the good news for the Lakers is that Austin Reeves, who they've really missed as he had that rough fall and is at a left pelvic contusion, he practiced on Thursday, is questionable for Friday. So getting him back will be a big help. I mean, especially with LeBron potentially not likely to play. So they'll need him back, and we'll see whether he ends up being available. Adam Flagler, who's not really getting much time on OKC, has a fracture in his fourth metacarpal, so that's on your hand. He's going to be out 4 to 6 weeks. John Isaac was a late scratch from that quarterfinal game. He's dealing with right hamstring soreness. Who knows how long he'll be out. And Zach Collins had to leave the last game before the break for the Spurs with a back contusion. And remember that Wembanyama has been dealing with back issues as well. So we'll have to monitor that for...
Yeah, Wemby, he missed or had to exit again with the, it looked like his back was kind of flaring up. He hurt it at the end of that Suns game when I can't remember who it was who took a charge. I think it was Bradley Beal tried to take a charge on him, fix the charge, and it kind of landed on it. It had been bothering him already. So he tried to come back, couldn't do it. So I haven't heard anything about his status coming up for Friday.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything either. For the Jazz, Kyle Filipowski is back. He missed a couple weeks with left lower leg injury management.
Yeah,
And so
it's also called a sprained ankle here on Earth.
Good news for the Wolves that Rob Dillingham is at least practicing now and seems to be progressing towards a return. We don't know when that return will be, but it would have been great for Dillingham to play in some of these last couple games for Minnesota. And then Steven Adams didn't play. We talked about how the Rockets didn't play a backup center in their quarterfinal win over the Warriors. So they're being extremely judicious with Adams. They're still winning a bunch of games. That's not, I mean, it's a problem because Steven Adams is a good player and you wish that he was around more.
And let's see, is that it? Oh, no, we got to scroll up a little bit here. Sam Hauser did hurt that groin, had to leave after 9 minutes against the Grizz, and he's not going to play against the Pistons, nor will Jason Tatum tonight. That's right patellar tendinopathy. This has been bothering him up and down, and again, I'm sure they're taking advantage of the opportunity to get him, a week or so of rest. Again, I find it quite telling that the way teams are operating when they actually have a chance to get guys rest is that, like, that's just so important to have even like the slightest break during the season, and lend some credence to my idea that if there were fewer games, guys would play in a lot more of them. But someone who's not going to be playing in a game anytime soon is Bojan Bogdanovic. He had that left foot surgery, and he must have fucked his foot up pretty bad, because like that was when he was diving for a loose ball in the playoffs. I can't remember who it was. I think it was in the Pacers series. Landed on his foot, and so yeah, he still doesn't have a timetable to return. He definitely won at the business of basketball by having that non-guaranteed contract that had to be guaranteed for salary matching in the Bridges deal. So he's getting paid $19 million, even though on the court he certainly has no reason to be getting paid $19 million. They just had to guarantee it. That was the 2017 CBA. They made that change. And Zaire Williams has a left knee sprain. He's had a lot of knee issues, a fourth straight game, but he's resuming on-court work, so hopefully nothing too serious for him.
We have a couple previews to do for the semifinals. No, the quarterfinals have concluded. It's so I'm actually, in some ways, I think I'm more interested, in part because the Rockets and Thunder just played about 2 weeks ago. It was a very fun game. We talked about it at length on Dunc'd On, about where the Rockets won in Houston, 119-116. About Atlanta and Milwaukee. Of course, these teams played a playoff series a few years ago, which Milwaukee won. But the thing that intrigues me about this is that the Bucks are a meaningfully different team roster-wise than they were then. They also are coached by a different human being, but they have far worse perimeter defense and perimeter defenders now than they did before. Does that burn them against one Trae Young?
Yeah, they don't have the ability to be as versatile as they were in the past, but I would say Trae is not as good of a player, at least as good of a scorer as he was back in 21, which might have been pretty much the height of his powers. And the biggest thing that we saw, the Hawks winning 119-104 against Milwaukee in Milwaukee about a week and a half ago, and blew him out in the end, was that Giannis had just a hilarious line, 15-26 from the foul line in that game. And I didn't get a chance to watch that one, but it is pretty fascinating. I mean, neither team shot well from three, but the Hawks were 9-32. Like, the Hawks are actually kind of getting a little Orlando Magic-y, where they just are one of these teams that doesn't shoot it that well, but just totally assaults the rim all the time. And Jalen Johnson is part of that. The centers are part of that. The other thing is that they forced 18 turnovers by the Milwaukee Bucks, and not a team that necessarily turns it over that much.
And 16 of those were steals.
Yeah, that's what won them the game. And then they also got on the offensive glass for 15 offensive rebounds. So it's a somewhat similar formula to what we saw them do against the New York Knicks. And the Bucks are a very skilled team, as the Knicks are, and also just don't have the athleticism that the Hawks have. So I think this game, and then the other problem too, we saw again that the Bucks struggled so much against Orlando, even without Franz and Paolo, for those very same reasons that the Bucks, like, they have a lot of skilled guys, but their only real athletes who are going to play are Andre Jackson, who played a whopping 11 minutes in this game against the Hawks. Wouldn't shock me actually if they finally go away from Jackson as a starter in this one, and that they also just don't really have any athleticism other than Jackson and Giannis. And the Hawks have a ton of athleticism now all of a sudden, and they're going to hurt you on the offensive glass. They're going to get steals, and they're going to play really hard. Other than Trae Young and the Bucks, they have a lot of schematic things that they can do that I think could cause problems, starting with Giannis and Damian Lillard as well. Although I think having Dyson Daniels is nice to be able to match up with Lillard, and maybe they won't have to get the bigs up as far as maybe some other teams do against Lillard defensively because they have Daniels. So I think this is going to be a pretty close game. I mean, I will end up picking the Bucks, I would say, because I think that Lillard is a great weapon to have at the end of the game, but there also isn't like a great guy to guard Trae Young at the end either. And so, especially if the Bucks don't like massively outshoot the Hawks from three, I think this is going to be very close. I think Atlanta has a very good chance of winning this one. The Bucks aren't that good. I think this is, a 60-40, 55-45 type of game.
I'm more in the 55-45. I think this is close to a coin flip. And Atlanta, even though they don't have necessarily the perfect single guy to defend Giannis, they do play a lot of size on the front court, and they have a lot of options. So we saw them commit a lot of fouls in the prior game, but they do have a lot of players. They
can bring Larry Nance off the bench as an option if they need to. And even Hunter, I think, would be okay-ish on Giannis. I mean, that's always the question is, and Onyeka Okongwu actually has been someone who's defended Giannis very well over the years if they do want to go the route of putting their center on him. And so I think it's going to be very important for Brook Lopez and Bobby Portis to make shots in this one, if in fact they do go with the center on Giannis.
And something I think that Chris Middleton could have some trouble. He had a really nice passing game in his season debut. But
Middleton did not play in the last matchup.
Yeah, the Hawks have a lot of length that they can throw at him, and they have a lot of different players. And then Dyson Daniels, if he can be his disruptive self, the battle between Daniels and Lillard when the Bucks have the ball is going to be so much fun to watch.
All right, let's talk about the other one then. So your pick is still Bucks?
It is. I'm somewhat reluctant. Like I think that the Hawks' chances, because they're kind of a less established team, are probably being underappreciated. But I still think the Bucks are going to win it. But we could go to the other one. As I mentioned, the Rockets beat the Thunder about 2 weeks ago in Houston.
Yeah, and we did like a 20-minute segment on that game too, if anyone wants to go back and listen. So I don't think we need to spend quite as much time on this one as we might have. But
I agree. And there is a big potential addition to that, because I believe, if memory serves, that game did not have Isaiah Hartenstein. No, he did play. He played 30 minutes. Yeah. That's right. And so I think that Hartenstein, yes, they were outscored during his minutes in that game 2 weeks ago, but I think that he can challenge some things. They don't function the same way that the Warriors do, but we saw Houston could turn the ball over. I think that OKC will have much more success on that front than they did in the game in Houston. Like they only had 5 steals and 10 forced turnovers in that, which is far lower than their usual standard. I do think though that the Rockets, like, their defense is 1000% legit. I think that they have a lot of guys they can throw at OKC's best players, but my question is whether Houston can generate enough offense unless their threes are falling at a really high rate.
Yeah, I think these teams have a lot of similarities, obviously. The two differences, I would say, being that Alperen Şengün is at least a little bit of a defensive weak point. Now, I don't think the Thunder caused as much problems for him as the Warriors did by running off-ball screening action and forcing him out on the floor away from the ball in that way. And the Warriors also just generally have more shooting with starting Steph and Buddy Hield than the Thunder do. I think they also can try to keep Şengün out of the action, have him guard Lou Dort more, but that's easier said than done, I would say. And Dort has shot it reasonably well so far this season. Like there is no Josh Giddey to stash Şengün on anymore. So that's the big difference, is that there is kind of that one vulnerability that you can pick at Houston's defense at least a little bit, even if Şengün has been a lot better. And so I think the Gilgeous-Alexander, Hartenstein pick and roll will probably end up having to be the primary method of attack, because I don't think there really is anyone else on the Thunder who's going to be able to do much as a scorer, creating one-on-one. Obviously, the possession game is going to be huge. Offensive rebounding, transition, two really athletic teams. Hartenstein has shored up the rebounding for the Thunder. The Thunder destroyed Dallas in the possession game on Tuesday, and the Rockets didn't do that to the Warriors, but they have been doing that all season. So that'll be a huge part of things. But then the other thing, of course, in addition to having Şengün as kind of that one spot you can pick at that the Thunder don't have, is that the Thunder have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and the Rockets don't. And so that's why I think the Thunder are going to be a pretty decent favorite in this one.
I'm picking the Thunder as well. And I also want to keep an eye on, I'm pretty confident that Ime Udoka is going to use a tight rotation. He did that in the quarterfinal. I think it's coming in the semi. But what does Mark Digdahl want to do? Does he tighten up the rotation? Does he go, okay, this is a big game. We have some time off because they have a longer gap. They don't play from Tuesday to Saturday. And maybe go a little harder with his best guys. Try that out. And I mean, Lou Dort was in foul trouble in the last game. So I think that we might finally see Digdahl run a tighter rotation.
One thing I think could be very interesting, particularly if the Thunder get down in this game, is we saw how effective the Thunder were putting two on the ball defensively. And would they try that? Like, Fred VanVleet's pretty reliable, but he's also small. And then Jalen Green, he has not really faced that coverage much because he just hasn't been a good enough shooter or ball handler to get them out of just kind of a basic drop. So would they try to just view it as more of an opportunity to put two on the ball against Jalen Green, particularly with let's say if Amen Thompson is on the floor, like he's not a great shooter, so you don't have as much ground to cover behind the play. They have a lot of guys they feel like can make plays behind. They're going to be very well rested. They'll have had 3 days off coming in and then the 2 more before the final. So if they feel like they're going to have a lot of energy and can fly around, that might be something that they could get to, is like, can we, particularly if they're down, blitz these Rockets ball handlers and force turnovers? There's also the question of Şengün in the post. I would say Hartenstein's biggest weakness is as a post defender. And so I would try to explore that as the Rockets, but certainly the Thunder are very capable of digging and reaching in with help, forcing steals, etc. You know, the VanVleet Şengün pick and roll is probably what they're going to try to go to the most. So would they even consider trying to switch that a little bit? Like, that could be tough for them because there isn't the obvious place to stash Hartenstein behind the play if you go that route. So there's going to be like how they deal with that VanVleet Şengün pick and roll is probably the hardest strategic issue for the Thunder to deal with.
I'm excited to see it. I think it'll be a fun one.
All right, let's see if we got any more quick questions we can clean up here. Maz has been a great commenter recently. Basically, a number of comments asking about the idea of how valuable is it to have a really good guard defender, and just generally the idea of value over replacement, I think, is what he's getting at here. And there's value over replacement in a couple of respects. One is just simply as a guard. And then, like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, value of replacement of a scoring guard. Sure. If you're going to have a scoring guard, usually that guy's going to be pretty bad on defense. So to have that guy actually be, if not an on-ball stopper, someone who can play a role behind the play and come over and make plays at the basket or get steals, how valuable is that? And I think he posits, hey, is that make up for the difference between Shai and Luka's playmaking? And yeah, I think there is certainly a reasonable component to that, particularly when you also note that Luka is someone who's generally going to be a minus on defense and at a position which he plays the 4 defensively, where you're hoping to get more help defense and have it be the low man, and Luka can't really do that. So now they've managed to craft pretty good defenses around Luka, to their credit. And I think he has gotten better in some areas, but he'll have his backsliding games. So yeah, that rationale was one of the biggest reasons I thought that Shea was better than Luka last year, and why I voted for him as the number 2 MVP.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair.
Okay, that will do it here for today's program, and we'll be back Saturday night, special Saturday episode, talking about the semifinals. We'll talk to you all then.